Very, very happy to have Pat Williams rejoining us. Of course, the creator of the Orlando Magic, Philadelphia 76ers general manager for a long period of time when I worked with the 76ers, and one of the really great guys that you can see in the world of sports. And Pat, we did a show a couple of nights ago in another area, and you brought up your new book. First of all, how many books, for all the people that are listening right now, how many books have you now written?
Don, the answer is 130.
Oh, my God.
And my high school English teacher, Mr. Oviat, would turn over in his grave. He'd never believe it. He'd have a hard time dealing with that. But his latest book is called Who Coached the Coaches? And it was quite a time putting it together. It took about 7 years. But look forward to chatting with you a little bit about it, Don.
Pat, I think that's the interesting factor. You mentioned the other night, you started out with your father. And so let's go back and sort of give the origination of what the idea was and how it came up. And as you said, 7 years is a long time to put into one book. Give us a little thumbnail sketch.
Well, Don, I have a good friend. His name is Ernie Accorsi. He was a friend at Wake Forest together, a longtime NFL general manager in the New York Giants Hall of Fame. And years ago, Ernie said to me, he said, I'm fascinated about coaches. I've studied coaches, my whole adult life in this business. And he said, but the one thing that I've never figured out or never learned about is how did they become coaches? What triggered that they wanted to become a coach? And Ernie said, why don't you tackle that one? So I started slowly, about 7 years ago, and whenever I would run into a coach or a manager at the big league level or major college, I just asked them a question: who was the key person in you becoming a coach, and what did you take from them? What did that key person do in your life? And that was it. And so over these 7 years, I tracked down, got to be well over 200 coaches. Wish I could have kept going, but the publisher said at some point we gotta print this, and because it never could have ended. But it was fascinating, and little by little, I just began to build this list. Many of the coaches, most of them you probably heard of, from Andy Reid to Pat Riley to Roy Williams to Fran Dunphy. I mean, on and on it went. And it's just been an intriguing and fascinating project. The book is out, Who Coached the Coaches? The publisher is Coach's Choice out on the West Coast. And you're going to read in the book exactly what these coaches told me. I didn't modify anything. Just identified the coach and what sport and where they are. And here's what they told me based on that question. So that's how it came about, Todd.
Pat, I thought you made a very, very interesting point the other night when we chatted, something that I have great admiration for, because my family's always been a big part of my life from my father on down. And you talked about that your father really being one of the people that got your ideas together about how you would conduct yourself, but more importantly about coaching and how you go about all the things you were doing.
Well, Don, there's no question our fathers have a big influence on us, but there were two themes that seem to keep coming up all the time on this project. Two common themes. The first theme was, as far as who was the key person in you becoming a coach, was my father, my dad. He seems to be the key element here, and that's a good challenge, Don. That's a great challenge to the importance of fathers. You are having an enormous impact on your children, and particularly if you were a high school coach. I got a lot of that from these coaches. My dad was a high school coach, and I was around it all the time. I was around his teams. I was around the locker room. I just grew up in that environment. I heard that a lot. That, by the way, was the case in my life. My dad was a high school baseball coach, history teacher. And I guess, I don't know, starting at the age of 4 or 5, I can remember hanging around his teams, hanging around the bench, the baseball team, and he was coaching that team. Now, here's the second theme that I got a lot of. The key person in me becoming a coach was my high school coach. I heard that a lot. I idolized my high school coach. I loved the way he handled himself. I loved the way he dressed. Loved the way he coached. He was an idol to me. I wanted to be just like my high school coach. I heard an awful lot of that. So there's another good lesson, Don, to youth coaches, whether you're coaching at Little League Baseball or whether you're coaching junior high basketball or high school football. Your athletes are looking at you intensely, and they want to be like you. They want to if you're modeling the right kind of life, they're watching, and they want to be following in your footsteps.
Pat Williams, our special guest in this segment tonight, and Pat, going back now, maybe you'd like to single out one or two, because I think one of the most difficult things to do at all levels, and you've worked at all levels. You mentioned that for your dad in high school, then college, of course, at Wake Forest, and then in the pros with the Philadelphia 76ers, and then when you created the team with the Orlando Magic. Selecting a coach, not an easy thing.
Don, it's you've got to be very careful in hiring a coach at this level. You've got to make sure that he's got the maturity to handle it. Maturity to handle the ups and downs of life in professional sports. Now, there's so many highs, so many lows, and you've got to have a stable personality that can handle this. It's not going to fly off the handle, when things are bad, or if things are really good, you get too comfortable or complacent. I think that's awfully important. And the other thing I learned is it's awfully good if you hire a coach that you enjoy being with, that you enjoy having a meal with, that you enjoy sitting and just talking about life. Coaches are a strange breed, and oftentimes they want to live in their own world. But I found as an executive, as a GM of teams, if you could find a coach that you really enjoyed being with, enjoyed just talking and fellowshipping with, and going through the highs and lows together, boy, that's a huge advantage.
Is there any one coach that stands out in your mind when you talk to them and you ask them this particular question you started the show with? Anybody that jumps right out at you and say, "Well, how about that?"
Don, one of my favorite chats was with Lefty Drizel. Old Lefty. He's still around. He lives in the Norfolk area, and I got a hold of him and bounced this question off him, and he proceeded to tell me exactly how he got into coaching and who were the key people. It was a marvelous chat, and I finished with him, hung up, and the phone, and a few minutes later he called back, and he said, in that wonderful Virginia drawl, he said, "Well, one more thing, Pat, one more thing." He said, I was never an assistant coach like Dean and those guys. Meaning Dean Smith and Mike Krzyzewski, all of them were assistants somewhere. But Lefty said, from the time he started in high school to Davidson College to Maryland and so forth, he never was an assistant. And he wanted to let me know. He said, I was never an assistant like Dean and those guys.
And he wound up there in James Madison. I'll tell you, he moved around to a lot of schools and did a lot of great coaching. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, that at Georgia State. But Don, the point I'm making is, there's old Lefty, well on into his 80s, still competing with Dean Smith, the late Dean Smith, still competing, always competing, never stopped competing. I never was an assistant like Dean and those guys, and I thought, isn't that great? The old left-hander, is still competing. He probably, and you know what Lefty told me? He said the highlight of his month is when he goes in for his pedicure. He said, I wish I'd learned about pedicures many years before.
How about Bobby Knight? Did you get him involved?
No, didn't get Bobby. Bobby's Donnie's dealing with some form of dementia, and so Bobby's just not himself. You're not going to get anything out of Bobby. So I had to pass on that.
Anybody else that comes to mind that as interesting as Lefty always was? Anybody else?
Well, Billy Cunningham comes to mind, and Billy, we had a nice chat one day about it, and his first one, he said, first key was Dean Smith, and those North Carolina guys, Don, are absolutely devoted to Dean Smith. I mean, devoted. And then Billy said the other one was Jack Ramsey, and I thought isn't that interesting, Dr. Jack, who we all loved. Dr. Jack was, of course, the great coach at St. Joe's in Philadelphia, and then took on the head coaching job with the Sixers in 1968-69, and Billy was there and played for him. And I thought, everybody that played for Jack in the pros, Bill Walton would be another great example. They had nothing but positive thoughts on Jack Ramsey, the coach, the NBA coach. But Billy pointed out the two keys to me were Dean Smith and Jack Ramsey. Not too bad, by the way, not too bad.
No question, and I'll tell you, Jack, when he got out there to Portland. Towards it and that group, Bill Walton, he had some very tough times when Buffalo was in Buffalo and before they moved out, but he finally found a spot where he had a great group of players to play with him, and he took them to a championship.
And Donnie was fortunate because the one key year that Bill Walton was not injured was that 76-77 season. When Bill played the whole season, was at his dominating best. And he never had another year like that, really, never.
Well, you may remember, Pat, and we went out to Portland the year after that, and it was really the end of Bill Walton's ability to play over a long period of time. It was halftime, just about halftime of our first trip out to Portland after the championship year. And it always amazed me because the Sixers at that time were down by, I'm going to say 12 or 13 points at halftime. And Julius Erving came down and gave one of those elevated jumps at the foul line and slammed it down. And people were on their feet screaming and everything else. And I'm saying to myself, what the heck? This is a game where you got this. Your home team is up by 12, 14 points against the 76ers. And Bill Walton, just before the half, hurt his foot again. And you're right. That was pretty much after that, it just never came around for Bill anymore.
He went to San Diego and tried to make a comeback.
Right.
That was hobbled. He did go on to the Celtics, and in a limited backup role, he did make major contributions. And he would tell you that was probably his second favorite year in the pros. He loved being a Celtic. And loved that role of coming off the bench and being a backup, and it worked for him. And but we'll never know, Don, how good Bill Walton could have been.
Right.
He would go down with the very best centers of all time. But if he could have been healthy, he'd have been at the very elite level. But Don, that's the thing with so many of these big men. They struggle with injuries. They just struggle with injuries, and you can just make a whole list of them. That with foot problems and ankle problems and knee problems, But it's not limited just to big men. I think back to Doug Collins in Philadelphia,
Oh,
and his enormous struggles with both of his ankles and both of his feet and both of his knees, and then after that came Andrew Toney, and we'll never be able to measure how great Andrew could have been, but he had one problem after another with his feet, and by the age of I don't know, 27, 28, basically his career was over. It's really, really sad when you see what leg and foot injuries do to so many NBA players.
yeah, Collins fought those stress fractures in his feet time and time, and every time you thought he was ready to go again, the doggone thing would pop up again. And I wouldn't let you go before about coaches, but I wouldn't let you go without at least making a comment about Wilt, because Wilt was in Philadelphia a couple of times, and what a storied man he is.
Well, Don, we're celebrating that heroic feat March 2nd, 1962, when Wilt went for 100 in Hershey, Pennsylvania, when the 76ers took a home game out on the road. And in Hershey, Pennsylvania, Wilt did something that nobody's ever done, probably never will do, 100 points against the New York Knickerbockers. And just a fascinating accomplishment. And the interesting thing is there were no newspapers there to cover it. Harvey Pollack, our dear friend, had to submit the articles to the Philadelphia newspapers. Bill Campbell did do the broadcast. And at night in those days, if it was clear, you could get WCAU up and down the East Coast. And I happened to be in my dorm room. It was my senior year at Wake Forest. I happened to be in the dorm room fiddling around with the dial, and then when you heard Bill Campbell's voice, excited, well, there was no voice quite like it. And he is describing, as Wilt Chamberlain comes down, and he's got 90 points, and he described it right down to the end. And fortunately, some kid in Philadelphia taped it. The station didn't, but fortunately, some kid, at home taped the thing, and we do have Bill bringing that historic basketball night down to its conclusion.
Yeah, he called us at. In fact, it was interesting because he called us at CAU, and Bill didn't have it, and he called Bill and said, "Look, do you have a copy of the broadcast that you had of the 100-point game?" And Bill said, "Oh no, absolutely not." And he said, "Well, I did. Just what you're saying. He taped it at home,
Yeah.
And so he sent it to Bill. So every time you hear it on a national broadcast now, it's this fan who actually taped it, sent it to Bill, and then of course it became a part of basketball lore. But it's
the same thing in 1951 when Bobby Thompson hit that historic home run against the Dodgers. Nobody taped it except some fan at home. And that's why we have a copy of Russ Hodges. The Giants win the pennant. The Giants win the pennant. Bobby Thompson hits one into the lower deck. I do not believe it. I do not believe it. Woo hoo hoo. That was some fan at home who taped that, and without it, we wouldn't have that voice.
Bill, I mean, before I let you go, Pat, one thing I would like you to touch on, because we've had a chance now. I've seen 4 exhibition games so far this spring. Saw the Phillies today here in Sarasota. And some of your thoughts very quickly, because you're a baseball guy first, and then you went from there to the basketball scene. But the new rules, what are you? Have you had a chance to sort of digest what they've done?
Don, everybody I have spoken to, and I had lunch today with a longtime Major League Baseball scout, Gary Nichols. I've talked to many others, talked to media members. I've been watching on television, and I all I can say is hallelujah. It's wonderful, and let's hope that it speeds the game up and gets pitchers to throw it, and above all, the batters have to stay in the batter's box. And they don't step out, and I never could understand. They readjusted their glove every time.
Right.
And I kept thinking, does it get that loose after one pitch that you took?
Well, I think they also have gotten the timing correct. 15 seconds, 20 seconds if there's a runner on first base.
No.
Number of times you can throw over. I think that's a positive. The only thing I would question a little bit, and I think it may change down the road, I'm still not for the ghost runner in the 10th inning. I know they want to, the game's so right now, they can't afford to go 15 innings, 16 innings with the pitchers. But I'd like them to go a little bit further. I think that the ghost runner starting in the 10th inning, that's the only one I would really question.
Well, let's see how that plays out. The scout I was with today said he really likes that rule. He said, we don't need 18-inning games anymore. And he said, when you're pitching outfielders and backup catchers and all of that. So we'll see how that plays out. The size of the bases, I don't think is that big a deal. I don't think. I do like the stationing of the infielders. Don, that's very much like the defensive rules in basketball. They set defensive rules that you couldn't. Well, they've done the same thing here. You must position on either side of second base. That's how we grew up with baseball, and I think they've put some sense back into baseball. When you hit a legitimate, solid base hit into right field, and you got an infielder stationed out there and throws you out at first base, oh my goodness, that to me was not the game. That was all these. I hate to say this, Don. It was all the Ivy Leaguers, who were up in the booth, figuring out all this stuff, and the Ivy Leaguers changed the whole course of baseball. And now they've got it back in the hands of baseball people, and I think that's going to make the game much better.
By the way, is a conclusion, Pat, any one other coach that you'd like to name coaches? Where can they get it, Pat? And also any other coach that you'd like to just touch on?
Well, Don, the name of the book is Who Coached the Coaches? And the publisher was Coach's Choice. And, one other... this one tickled me to death, and I don't remember all the details, but I contacted Andy Reid and asked if he would participate. Don, he sent me back handwritten, like a 4-page letter of his memories of all this. A 4-page letter, handwritten, back from Andy Reid, and I'm a huge Andy Reid fan anyway. But boy, that really touched me that he would take that kind of time in his busy life and just share his early memories of becoming a coach. So go get him, Andy. Whenever he does well, like this last Super Bowl, I'm happy for him. He's a class guy, quality guy, and a very caring man.
Well, Pat Williams right at the top of the list as well, and I want to thank you once again for joining us. And more importantly, I just don't get over to Orlando that much, but I'll get there one of these days. And one last thing, any new word on things are not changing anything in Tampa, but any new word? I know you've been fighting to get a baseball team over there. Anything new?
Don, Orlando's ready. I mean, we're a major market. We're a bigger media market than Miami now.
Oh, the number one, Orlando last year, tourist attraction, number one in the country.
How about the world?
Yeah,
and that's not slowing down. It's coming back full bore, and so we're ready. We've got everything you need for a major league team. You got to have 4 things, Don. 1, you've got to have the marketplace. 2, you've got to have a ballpark. 3, you've got to have a front office staff that knows what they're doing, and number 4, you've got to have an owner. We're still seeking that owner. Ownership in pro sports now is not for the wealthy; it's for the extraordinary wealthy.
Right.
And so we're looking for that right owner. We've got the market. We think we have the right staff, and we're just working on designing a ballpark. And so we're having a good time, fascinating time, really, and. We're watching very closely what's going on in St. Pete. I'm still not convinced that St. Pete can get a ballpark built. We'll see. We're watching it very closely.
Well, Pat, thank you once again for your time. It's always a lot of fun. Has been over the years. We'll hopefully continue to be that way in the future. But thanks so much, and we'll get together again real soon.
Todd, thanks a million. Good to visit with you. Always. Thanks.